Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Nolan. I've led our efforts with the ABA Admiralty Committee Pod Sale podcast. We're recording this presentation on Admiralty law in the 21st century involving the government and private practice interaction. The person who's leading our chat today and our program is Jessica Martyn. Jessica, hand it off to you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all very much for coming. Looks like we have a good mix of law students, practitioners, industry representatives, and I'd like to begin by introducing our panel. We have, to my left is Waid from the Federal Maritime Commission. To my right is Lieutenant Matt Dursa, United States Navy, Office of the Judge Advocate General Litigation Division. And to Lieutenant Dursa's left is Lieutenant Commander Brandy Parker with the Coast Guard Legal Counsel, Coast Guard Intelligence Coordination Center. And to my right is Raymond Waid of Phelps, Dunbar, in New Orleans. I'm Jessica Martyn. I'm an associate at Troutman Sanders in their Norfolk, Virginia office in their Maritime Government Contracts practice. So again, thank you all for coming. And I'm sorry. Chris, if you introduce yourself.
Sure.
Chris Nolan, partner with Holland Knight in New York, and Laurie stands with Riker, Danzig, Scherer, Hyland, and Perretti in New Jersey. Thank you again. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to just begin with introductions from each of you individually. If you would please address your office environment, what your daily practice is like, just to give some brief background on your practice and how your life is as a lawyer in your various environments. If you'd like to start.
Sure. As I was introduced, Matt Dursa, and I'm at the Office of the Judge Advocate General, which is our headquarters element here in D.C. In the last few years, I've had really three separate jobs. I came to D.C. To our Code 11. Our headquarters split into different codes. That was Admiralty and Maritime Claims. We handle maritime matters basically before they are litigated. So anything that is a claim, and then once they go to litigation, we support the Department of Justice in that litigation. After a few years there, I was detailed to the Department of Justice to their aviation and admiralty section, which, as the title implies, litigates aviation and admiralty matters. And currently back in uniform, back at headquarters at Code 14, which is our General Litigation Division. Where I am currently, we have 10 uniformed attorneys. We deal with a wide variety of litigation, some of which, actually, things that are outside of admiralty jurisdiction, but things that have strong maritime nexus. The best example of that is supporting piracy prosecution. We're coming up this summer supporting the Department of Justice with 3 capital defendants in a trial in the Eastern District of Virginia. So providing litigation support for those issues.
Hi, I'm Brandy Parker. Since I've been in the legal program for the Coast Guard, I started out at the 8th District in New Orleans, and I just did pretty much everything. So I advised our operational commands on the legal ramifications of some of the things they wanted to do, such as the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I was unfortunately down there for that, and that was my command was the Sector New Orleans command, which had primary jurisdiction on all of that. So I spent a lot of time in the command post when we first started up, getting them started, making sure they were actually doing everything right in accordance with the environmental protection laws and all that good stuff.
Was that a big oil spill? I'm not familiar with that.
Just a little bit.
Okay.
And that was actually, the second major oil spill I had to deal with while I was stationed down there, because we had the one that Ray's familiar with, the collision with a tank ship and a tank barge in the Mississippi River the summer before that, which also happened to be the Sector New Orleans, so also my client. So I actually got to spend some time helping the investigating officer in her formal board of inquiry. I also dealt with the traditional, what we call OWS cases. Oil water separator is a piece of machinery on vessels, deep draft vessels, Coast Guard vessels, you name it. that basically does what it says it does theoretically. Is it takes the oil out of the bilge water and separates it out so that you can just put out clean water, at least less than 15 parts per million of oil, into the ocean. Keep that oil on board until you go somewhere where you can legally discharge it. So our guys out in the field would go out and do an inspection on a vessel and say, I think these guys have been discharging oil, not using the OWS. And so they bring in us, and we'd negotiate with the civilian attorneys out there that represented the shipping company or the charter or whoever was involved, and in dealing with getting a surety agreement and how we're going to deal with the cases. And we'd also liaise with the U.S. attorney and our Coast Guard Investigative Service, which did the law enforcement investigation after we got our inspectors off. So right now, for the last 3 years, I've been up here at the Coast Guard Intelligence Coordination Center. First attorney they ever had assigned there. My primary duty is intelligence oversight. So Coast Guard intelligence is mainly law enforcement intelligence, but also national intelligence, community intelligence. So we deal with a lot of the drug smuggling, human migrant smuggling, human trafficking, those types of things. Also environmental stuff is a little bit of part of our our law enforcement side. So that's very fascinating, trying to keep us legal when we're doing our analysis and our reporting.
My name is Waid. I practice at Phelps, Dunbar, and have for the last 6 years. I have 100% Admiralty and Maritime Practice, typically representing vessel owners and their underwriters in the wide array of things that can go wrong when you're a vessel owner. Collisions, cargo damage cases, personal injuries, both for seamen and longshore and harbor workers. And it's been a dynamic practice because, as Brandy described, down in New Orleans we have a dynamic maritime environment. We have both the blue water large vessels that come into the river to trade, as well as inland transportation, tug and barge, and then the offshore service industry. All of the rigs that are in the Gulf of Mexico are serviced by a huge fleet of smaller vessels, many of them, very, very expensive and very highly specialized. And so, when all of these big expensive ships get into problems and start bumping into things in the night, the damages are high and they're fun cases to litigate.
Thank you. Aaron?
My name is Eric Lee, and I promised my agency ethics officer I would preface my comments by saying that my faults are my own faults and do not represent the Federal Maritime Commission. They do not represent Commissioner Doyle. Stoltz, they are my own. I started out so I guess if I say my transition, I started out in the Port of Mobile, not far from Ray, and not far from the oil spills, plural spills. I've been with the commission for just over a year. I guess March was a full year. I went to the General Counsel's office from private practice. In the General Counsel's office, it's most of my tasks would be advisory oriented in terms of advising the commission. So I would have maybe an issue that's an inch wide and a mile deep, almost an academic analysis of these issues at times. It would also include responding to Congress when they ask for technical expertise, international trade expertise, helping our economists and rationalizing a position that Congress might have, or just answering a question. In January, I was detailed to the newest commissioner as his counsel, and in that capacity, it's a one-man shop. It's just me, and it's a little bit different than the GC's office because at times that can be a little bit versatile depending on the situation. Challenging their opinions, challenging the opinions of other commissioners, challenging outside counsel, and responding to the public. But it's fun.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Laurie?
My name is Laurie Sands. I work up in New Jersey. My primary practice is environmental with an interest in marine policy. Just basically, we don't have, it's good or bad for me, the big oil spills up in New Jersey, but we do have issues, pipeline issues, smaller oil spills, and those types of things that I deal with.
Chris Nolan, since the focus on this ABA TIPS Admiralty Committee program, which we're happy to have Ted Dunlop, who sponsored it from RTI. Thanks very much for that, Ted. Since the focus of this is government, I'll talk a little about the government side things that we've done. I've got Blake Daly, my trusty colleague here. We had a piracy case where we had to deal with OFAC issues. You want to make sure that if ransoms are being paid, that they're being paid to the right people, that the government will say, based on the information as it currently looks, you are not giving money to Al-Qaeda pirates. And that's the best you'll get. You also, being in New York, we deal with the banks a good deal when monies are stopped or there's questions involving Iranian sanctions. That's the largest headaches right now. Also, we've represented governments and government instrumentalities in lawsuits in the United States, and that's government related, because when you're dealing with a government or a foreign government or their instrumentality, which they may think should be immune from everything, you have some good, frank, honest discussions about practice in the United States. So there it is.
All right, thank you. Thank you all. Now, focusing on our law student audience today, I'd like to go back to your law school experiences. Tell us about where you focused your energy while you were in law school. Let's start with Ray. Did you focus on your court, interning, meeting people while you were in law school? Where did you?
I did a lot of socializing.
Okay.
Wait, where did you go to school?
That network.
I went to the esteemed Tulane University in the esteemed New Orleans, and there were a lot of opportunities to socialize. But seriously, I encourage all of the law students that I talk to, do moot court, do a journal, because I really view law school as primarily a trade school. There's a certain skill set that you need to have when you graduate to succeed as a lawyer, and the best way to get that skill set is to supplement the classroom with real hard skills-based activities like moot court and the journal. I was on the Tulane Maritime Journal with Blythe, and also did a trial moot court team, and neither of those things got me a job. But once I got a job, I've succeeded in that job because, inevitably there'll come a time in your first year, your second year, your third year when a partner will let you do something that is just over the edge of your competence level. And if you've built your skill set up, you're going to succeed and you're going to get more of that type of work. And so, the law students I talk to, they're primarily interested in just getting that job right out of law school. I have to tell you, I don't think the moot court and the journals will necessarily get you that, but it's going to set you up for long-term success. It's going to make you a better lawyer. So that's on the skills-based side. The other thing that I did a lot of informational interviews. I talked to every maritime lawyer I could. My wife and I were thinking about moving to San Francisco. We spent our second summer there, and I just went and knocked on doors. And I found that the Maritime Bar is a very congenial bar. It's one of the last kind of nice, friendly litigators in the United States. And so, and people that practice maritime law are kind of geeked out about it. And I found that most practitioners were very happy to sit down and talk to me about what they do and how they got there.
And don't let Waid fool you. He's been a trusted local counsel for us. He knows what he's doing. Okay.
Lieutenant Dursa, to address that as well.
I will, and I also have to confess that I'm a classmate of Ray's. So, spending law school in New Orleans, I'll call it networking, to be as diplomatic as I can. And I'll just say that that's where I focus. And I think that's a good place to put your energy, both in terms of getting a job, not even necessarily making the connections to get your foot in the door or to get you hired, but really to find out what is an employer looking for. Oftentimes, be it a government or a private advertisement, it's a very sparse posting, strong academic performance preferred, law review preferred, but it's tough to really see what are they looking for. So without talking to an attorney at that firm, it's tough to gauge where to put your energy if that's the job that you want. And then after you have a job, Ray talked about being just beyond your competence level. And there's certainly those moments as a junior attorney where someone more senior to me would say, why don't you take this issue on or write me a memo on the following? Yes, ma'am, I'll get right on that. And they walk in the door, and the first thing I do is you pick up the phone and call Ray and say, they just asked me this, I don't know how to do that. What can you tell me about it? So having those connections within a peer group or with a mentor that you're more comfortable when maybe you necessarily can't go right back to that direct supervisor can be a very, very helpful tool.
Eric, let's go to you since you've been on public and the private side. When you were in law school, did you have a particular direction you were aiming for, and did you do the same sorts of networking and focus on law review or any of that?
My focus was doing maritime work. I've stumbled or stumped myself with my ultimate goal of being near the water. I'm now in D.C. But my ultimate goal was doing maritime stuff to keep me near the water. It's what I focused, how I focus my efforts. I'm going to jump and sort of tie in one of your later questions on developing your career. I was the editor of the International Journal at my law school in South Carolina, University of South Carolina. And I met, we hosted a port symposium on some developments that were taking place in North South Carolina. Had some friends in the economic development stuff in South Carolina had some interest, so I tried to stay well read and know what their needs were. And I met a guy named Roy Lampert, who is a Tulanian, who then convinced me, without much effort, to do my master's at Tulane. So I focused, if I take a step back and look, I think I focused my efforts in finding mentors and listening to them. I agree with Ray. I don't think that journal. I was on the Tulane Journal as well. I was at Tulane. I was on the South Carolina Journal as an editor. Those things are great. I encourage you to do them. But I don't think that necessarily got me. I don't think it got me a job. I think that knowing what employers want and just as important as knowing what the law firm wants, knowing what the law firm's clients need is important. Know your business.
Thank you. Senator Parker, Eric talked about finding Roy Lampert as sort of a mentor for law school. Is there any figure like that for you? The answer is no, it's fine.
Well, I was in a unique situation because I was a Coast Guard funded law student.
Okay.
So I wasn't focused on trying to find a job. Looking back on it now, going, wow, that was kind of dumb of me, because eventually I'm going to have to try to find a real job. So maybe that was a mistake, but no, I didn't really find any, look towards mentors. I've really done that more since I've gotten out of law school and got to the Coast Guard. There's been more people who could guide me in my service. So one thing I would kind of like to echo what Ray said as far as moot court. I didn't do moot court. I wanted to focus on. I was focused on environmental law with a little bit of Admiralty, and I wanted to focus on taking all those specialty classes, those nice classes in your third year. And looking back, I think I would have been better served if I had gone to moot court and just knocked out some of those classes, because the classes, you can learn some things that every once in a while I fall back and go, oh man, let me pull up my international environmental law notes, and that helped me on this. But I think that within 6 months of getting to my first unit, I was the lead counsel on a court martial, and I didn't really know much about trial procedure other than what little bit we learned at Naval Justice School for 2 months. So I think if you're interested in litigation, do it. If you're not interested in litigation, do it, because you're going to end up in litigation anyway. So I didn't think I was interested in litigation, and that's why I didn't do it. And then I got out there and did a court martial or two and found out that I loved being in the courtroom. Love it. So it actually turned out to be the exact opposite of what I thought I would want to do with my career. So I think those kind of like job training, job skills type of opportunities, don't pass them up. I also focus a lot on my pro bono work because my internships, I had to go work for the Coast Guard during the summers. I couldn't expand my horizons with my internships. So instead, I did a pro bono job. Instead of doing the required 20, I think I did 150 hours. Basically, I spent my off time. I worked for a city councilman in the city of New Orleans just to see another side of the city. And of course, it's post Katrina. I also went to Tulane. It's post Katrina, redeveloping the city, and ended up through that office, got to meet some of the people that were working on New Orleans recovery, finding out we're working on the same thing. So while I had interest in environmental and maritime, I ended up working on some tax issues. And yeah, I don't have an interest in tax issues, but what it does is, like, when I get in there and all of a sudden they're throwing at me this civilian employment mess, that I have to help them figure out. Well, I know how to kind of stretch my brain and go for something completely different than anything I've ever experienced before. So that's really what I did.
And I want to throw out to the entire panel, this one's up for grabs, whoever wants to take it. Spinning off of Commander Parker's comments about encountering the unexpected in her career, and Eric's comments about being very focused on maritime from beginning law school. Who wants to address their trajectory? Did you start off in a certain direction and you ended up somewhere you didn't expect to be, and how did that happen?
I could give since I didn't go to Tulane, I visited about 3 weeks ago. Sat in Professor Davis' class on maritime liens and wrote a lot of notes. When I went to law school, I took a lot of international law classes. And when I got to a law firm that had admiralty law, it seemed like a natural fit. Having now been in the practice for 10 years, one of the things that I think is pretty important in law school that you can get a focus on now is from a contractual aspect. In maritime law, there's a lot of indemnity issues, a tremendous amount of indemnity issues that'll make your head hurt a lot. You've been involved in the Deepwater Horizon case. I know you're smiling, Randy. It's a very big thing. So if there's an offshore class, I know that Tulane offers, that's a key thing. The other thing is when you're coming out of law school, or if you're a young lawyer still trying to find your way, make yourself indispensable in one specific area where someone in your firm kind of gets to know they can pick your brain on it. So we have in our office folks who are very keyed in on oil pollution, very keyed in on attachments, arrests, security. I focus a lot of my time on limitation liability issues. Blight's the only one who's responsible for every area of law. But that's the thing. Make yourself marketable to the folks who are around you, because when you get out of law school or you're a junior attorney, your client is actually very simple. You never have to run a conflict check. It's the partner or the senior associate you're working for. If you don't make her or him happy and juggle things so that you're able to come on a sailing event with us later, then it's not going to be pleasant. But that's the goal. That's the goal. And please get some pizza here. It's going to get cold.
Well, just to jump on the end of that, the most important person to keep happy, the objective has definitely changed for me. When I agreed to serve in the Navy, I was a bachelor in New Orleans. So my decision-making process was, what's the most adventurous? And this was a great career for me. Recently, I had to decide, was I going to obligate myself to more service? And the answer was the same, was the Navy. But now having a wife and a baby girl, it's a very different analysis. And that's not something that I thought about, frankly, in law school. It's, is this going to be good for my family, good for my future children? How is the quality of life at this employer? And I think that's something that maybe not every law student takes into consideration.
And spinning off of that too, what sort of helped you make that decision? Was that all on your own? Did you reach out to other people in that situation, or not?
I reached out to a lot of people, quite frankly. I'm very fortunate to have a few very good mentors within the Navy to talk about what my future would be like there, and calling a lot of peers in the maritime field as well to see what was available, what life was like outside the Navy, and then even talking to some, Ray mentioned the informational interviews, just absolutely crucial. Find out what's out there, and there's something about sitting down and not having the pressure of, are you going to hire me, or am I going to improve anything? Just sit down and talk and learn about what life is like in that city, in that market. I did a lot of all three of them.
And that's a nice transition into our next topic of the interplay between government and private practice. But before we leave the law student sort of discussion and things about law school that helped or that influenced you, would anyone want to make any more comments on that topic? Then going into the interplay that you mentioned, deciding or speaking with mentors and people in the industry about whether to go public, private, or to stay with the Navy. How would you address that to law students? What helped you make that decision, whether to go public or private?
I think the factors that made me stay in the Navy, the biggest thing for me was the diversity of practice. I think that the military offers an amazing opportunity to change practice areas completely every 3 years. That was appealing to me. It was also something I struggled with. I went to Tulane because I was interested in maritime law. I had a previous career in the maritime industry. So the fact that I couldn't sit down and really specialize in one area of law, it was both a positive and a negative. That was something I had to think about, as well as the reality of moving a family every 3 years. It's exciting, it's a lot of fun, something we think about in our house, but at the same time, when you're in a place like DC, where life's good here, it's difficult to think, well, where am I going to be in 3 years? Am I going to be Corpus Christi? No offense to the Texans, but it's not where I want to head. So. Diego Garcia, there you go.
Hawaii.
Ray, if you would address that as well. Our time as an internist and now private practice. Can you talk about?
Yeah, I think it's a tougher decision to make for Brandy and Matt because you have a limited window to go to the military. You know, they want you to come in young, and they want you to get out while you're still young. 45, well, when you're 18, seems really old. It's not in the big scheme of things. But there's other government organizations like the Federal Maritime Commission, and even the Coast Guard has and the Navy has civilian employees where you can kind of walk in and out of government service. And I know in DC that's a big part of professional life here, where you have people that will go into the government, gain kind of an intense exposure to how the agency operates and what laws and regs they deal with, and then they go out and they make a lot of money using that experience, and they go back and forth. For me, I was in the Navy for 4 years as a surface worker officer, which means I drove ships, and then I was a reservist while I was in law school. I really wanted the private experience, having, after college, just done the military. I wanted to get out and see what the private sector was like, and what the law firms are like. And I enjoyed it. And for me, that was an easy choice, and I would continue to stay on the private side.
Okay. Laurie, Chris, did you have any deliberation about whether to go government or private practice? And if you did, what made you go private practice?
Well, I actually worked for 6 years at the DP, the New Jersey DP, before I went to law school. Well, I went to law school as I was working, so I was in the government practice, not as a lawyer, but in the government. And I remember going to law school talking to somebody, and he said to me, "So why are you here? Do you want to save the world, or do you want to own it?" I looked at him and I said, "I'm an environmentalist. I want to save the world." And always thought I'd go back into the government. And when I came out of law school, I ended up going into private practice because I thought I wanted to be a litigator, and then ended up being a litigator. And people told me, go into private practice, get the experience you need, and then you can always do whatever you want. And there was a professor at law school who said to me, "Be careful, because once you go into private practice, it's very difficult to leave private practice, especially if you're making a lot of money, and go into the government or into a non-governmental organization or something like that." So I ended up going into private practice, and 16 years later, I'm still in private practice. I enjoy private practice. Sometimes I miss some of the things that I may be able to do, could have been able to do maybe in a governmental position, but it's worked out for me, and I think part of my involvement in the ABA allows me to do some of those things that I can't do in private practice and meet some of those people that I would have liked to have worked with, but don't because I'm in private practice.
I don't have anything to add.
All right.
How can I follow Laurie's sentence?
That's great. Well, spinning off of something that you mentioned about that transition piece, you start off in public and you transition easily to private practice. Can anyone on the panel address that?
Yes. I bought this iPad when I was an associate. The government did not buy this iPad. I missed my marketing account. I missed the expense account. I missed the secretary. I missed the paralegal. It's different. I enjoy what I do. So most of what I'm saying is I'm joking, but it's a big change. I was in the Army way back when, but not as a lawyer. And going from the private practice as an attorney to the government side is definitely a change. Most of the things that I would guide in the General Counsel's shop, as I said earlier, would be a very narrow scope. And I'm at the commission, I'm already in a very narrow scope of the shipping industry. It's probably better said to call it the business of shipping. And within that, being within a very narrow issue. And it's anyone who's been in private practice, or you guys in the Navy and the Coast Guard, you get a variety. You guys have lots of variety. I probably don't have near the variety in the General Counsel shop that any given attorney on the street does. At my current job, so a lot of times attorneys will come right in as counsel to the commission, as I think they're called political designees to the political appointee. I'm a GS employee, so still a little bit, or I'm a federal employee as opposed, and I was a prior federal employee. So you've got a lot of different dynamics even in that job than I would have in the General Counsel's shop as a normal federal employee. It's different, but I do enjoy it. The pace is probably overall slower, but again, I bought this iPad as an associate, and I never had an attorney tell me, I want you to go home. I never had my boss, John Kavanaugh, tell me, I want you to go home and I'm not going to pay you at least one day per pay period for the next 8 months. Law firms don't sequester associates. They either hire them or expand. So that's another difference to deal with for a federal employee.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Private.
Well, the only thing I want to, kind of like what Matt was talking about, I think for me, as far as staying in the Coast Guard and how much longer, because I'm coming up close to retirement eligibility, is really that quality of life. I started a family, have a young child now, and the being a Coast Guard attorney versus being a line officer, I generally get to go home at night, generally at home. I work really nice hours, 7:30 to 4 on a normal day. However, if something happens, they expect you to be there when you need to be there. And you do carry duty phone a lot. But generally speaking, that versus, the constant drive to actually be the indispensable person and to be getting noticed, to get those promotions and raises and, stay employed. You don't quite have that. You have to worry about advancements and all this stuff. But it's just, my perception is it's a slower or a different pace, one that works better for me right now, where my life is. So, you guys, if you're all young and single, it's maybe not the same consideration. But I will say that if you do go into one of the military services, Navy not so much, but like Coast Guard and the Marines, you stay line officers. So I could go and say, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore, and a lot of Coast Guard attorneys do this. and go back into the field doing the operational missions of the Coast Guard. So there's, even if you're looking at government service, even if you're looking at military service, there's a lot of different things to consider.
Brandy, that has to be the first time anyone's compared the Coast Guard and the Marines.
Waid's causing trouble.
I just had to do that.
But Jessica, one thing that I was talking to Ray about last night, which I think could be interesting since we're talking a little about the interaction between government and private practice, is taking an example of Brandy where you've got, you are on call if something happens and there's an issue, and let's say it involves oil, it gets a lot of people's attention. But let's break it down to something which is very active for us in the maritime industry in the last decade: oil and water separators. And Ray, why don't you take this? As we had a chat about it, that interaction with the government and how to handle it, and perhaps how it's not a good idea to handle it, is a good thing to get out there.
That's it's probably one of the more interesting aspects of maritime law in my practice, and the part of my practice where I deal the most with the government generally. You deal with, the Coast Guard wears a number of different hats. When we'll set up the scenario, a ship pulls into port from a foreign country, and the Coast Guard will come on board to do a routine inspection. And part of that routine inspection includes looking at the oil record book and other mandatory logs that the ship's required to keep. And if that routine inspection doesn't go the way it does 99% of the time, then they call people who at the Coast Guard who are wearing a different hat. So is the enforcement hat, what's the name of it?
It depends on the sector, but yeah, we're generally enforcement, the response.
So people with a little bit more in-depth knowledge of the oil and water separators, the special skill set in finding ways that the crew may have tried to pump oil directly to the sea, or any other kind of ways that they're not supposed to, they'll come on board. And it's at about that time that I get a phone call in the middle of the night, or in the morning while I'm brushing my teeth, and it's, the owner's gotten word that there may be something wrong with the ship. The owner's sitting at some desk in a foreign country. They don't know what's going on. Please get out there and tell me, what's going on. What do we need to do? And so we'll do that. We'll go out. We'll talk to the crew. We'll look at the records ourselves, and we'll talk to the Coast Guard and say, hey, is there something wrong here? Do you need anything from us? The owners, all of the owners want to do the right thing so that they don't get in trouble with the government, because it's expensive and it's a hassle to not follow the rules. And so, we'll go to the government and say, what do we need to do? Is there a problem here? And if there is a problem, then the government will enter negotiations with you to sign a security agreement where they're not going to let your ship go until we work out this deal. And that's when there's some criminal possibilities on the horizon. And so we'll be involved in pulling the crew off the ship, because some of them are going to have to be witnesses, bringing a new crew in to take the ship and leave, and then working with the government. And at this point, it starts to transition from the Coast Guard to the Department of Justice. And they're working together behind the scenes, and we're working with both of them, trying to make the Coast Guard happy and the Department of Justice happy, and cooperate in their investigation to find out whether the crew did anything wrong, which members of the crew did something wrong, what did they do wrong, and to see if the company should have done something differently or should do something differently in the future to prevent whatever problem it is. And that is, there's not a lot of law involved. There's a lot of administration and negotiation and just kind of, personalities involved. Less brief writing and the rest of it, but a lot of just kind of understanding the legal background and trying to work things out. But And would you say that was the same? I mean, that was when you really got involved with private attorneys?
Absolutely. And my least favorite interactions are with private attorneys that are prior government attorneys. To be honest with you, because I think it's from your law firm, actually. But yeah, no, they're.
Can we delete this podcast?
She didn't specify on the record.
No, that's good.
I can tell who I was pointing at. No, it usually, generally 9 times out of 10, they're very, cordial interactions, and everybody is sitting there dealing with the same situation that is coming up on a holiday weekend or just a weekend in any event, and you're spending a lot of hours on the phone trying to negotiate these agreements and trying to figure out what actually happened. From our standpoint, it generally, I would say maybe 7 times out of 10, we don't actually find the bypass or the evidence. It's a crewman, a very low-ranking crewman on one of these ships that comes up to us with cell phone video. It's really unfortunate when there's other stuff, it's a cell phone video, there's other stuff on the cell phone, and you're like, hey, this is evidence now, thank you. Some of those can be very unpleasant interactions. And also, you're dealing with these crew, and the attorneys for the government for the company are, hey, what, we have to, we're losing a lot of money while we're dealing with this, so you guys need to figure it out, know what you're doing, don't hem and haw around. And I'm dealing with, my inspectors and regulatory investigators. I want to keep that clear. That are out on the vessel trying to do their job, but sometimes they're dealing with maybe not the best conditions and maybe not the most experience, and so trying to speed them up and figure out what we have to do. How many of these crew members do we actually need to keep? Do we actually have enough evidence to go forward? At what point do we start negotiating a security agreement? When do we, talking to the government attorney, the AUSA, and just trying to manage all those and trying to manage from my point of view, where do you transition from a regulatory interaction to a criminal interaction, and that changes the whole calculus because of our authority in the Coast Guard. We can do a lot under our organic authority without a warrant. And as soon as it becomes a criminal, then that whole thing shifts, especially when you have a vessel that can't go anywhere. So those kind of interactions with the government attorneys, like they're pushing. No, you've already gone criminal. You need to get off. You start getting warrants. We're like, oh no, we're still on the inspection. So it's a lot of personalities. If you get some people that you can work with really well. And everybody's trying to get to the same thing. Get this over with, figure out what we have to do, what we're dealing with, and either let this vessel go and say, okay, we didn't have anything or we can't prove anything, or getting it off to the U.S. attorney, and then letting the vessel go so they can continue to do world trade. So it's really interesting and kind of fun interaction, but stressful.
And just as a background principle, probably the very first thing you need to know about maritime law is ships need to move. A ship at rest is not a good thing. These things in the blue water business, your big ships, those are thousands of dollars an hour, and so whether it's a private litigant who is arresting a ship or the government who's detaining the ship, it's a big problem, and everybody freaks out. You get people's attention when you stop the ship. So that's some of the background and the intentions that come into play when you're dealing with a marine pollution case. And that's in the front end. And then you start worrying about people going to jail. And that's got its own tension.
So if you take nothing from this program, if you remember nothing, remember ships need to move. You can quote Ray Waid on that.
They do.
Yeah.
They need to move.
From our perspective, the government's perspective too, it's like the last thing we want to do is be holding a ship there.
Don't want to stop commerce.
That's right.
Well, in both Ray and Brandy mentioned that transition to the Department of Justice, and I think that's a really important part of the communication between private practice and government attorneys. I've dealt a lot with very competent private attorneys who might not understand the particulars of my agency and how we handle cases and what our statutory authorities are. And a great example of that is to be on the phone with someone negotiating a settlement. As a Navy attorney, they've asserted a claim. We're almost there with the numbers, plenty of time under the statute of limitations, and without telling me, they go ahead and file a complaint. And that almost always switches the authority to settle the claim to the Department of Justice. And so they're calling me up saying, hey, I think we're right there. Can you go ahead and sign off on this? And I've lost my ability to help them at all. And now a new attorney has to get spun up on it. A new supervisor has to get spun up on it. And they've delayed the ability of their client to settle the matter for another 30 to 60 days. So just getting on the phone and saying, what's going to happen if I take the next step, can really help your client and the government handle things efficiently.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, from my perspective, and this is mine, having been in private practice and now work for the government, I like direct attorneys. Be direct. We deal with we deal with antitrust issues, and I would venture to say there's probably fewer things that scare most clients and their counsel than antitrust issues. And I kind of like people who are direct and sort of explain the position. I know a lot of times, also for clients and private sector counsel, that's a bit challenging to trust the government sometimes in certain contexts, and for a variety of reasons, none of which are necessarily illegal. But to the extent that you can be direct with us, be direct. And tell us what's going on. In my context, it's with an agreement or some tariff issue or something like that. It's more of a business, less of a liability, but more of a business side of things and less of the wet work. But, still, just be direct.
Well, and I think in terms of being direct, and again, in understanding the process, one of the things that's important is learning your opponent's client's objective. I think I've spent a lot of time in mediations where someone was demanding a tiny bit more money that would really take a cabinet member to approve that settlement. Whereas if they would come down just a little bit more, it could be done at a very low level. And that's not really supposed to impact our settlement, but realistically, knowing what those thresholds are can get you to a more realistic number. And likewise, I've wondered, why are they pushing for just a little bit more money when there's a truck payment that needs to be made or a home that needs to be paid off or some objective. And neither attorney is really communicating those things very well, both at the table talking about dollar amounts when there are some real thresholds that would get us to a settlement a lot faster.
Okay, well, we're almost to the end of our time. I would like to open it up for questions if you all have any. Or we can keep talking.
It's like 2 minutes.
Yes, go ahead.
My name's Eric Lowen. I'm a 4L night student at University of Baltimore, and I'm also work for KLN America, so with the steamship line. So one of the things we've been dealing with lately at the line is with the ECA issue. And I'm wondering if you, as attorneys, if that's something you've seen on the compliance side or also on the regulatory side with having to burn the fuel in the vessels, the low sulfur fuel.
Laurie will take that. I'm sorry.
The FMC had a meeting yesterday with a couple of the environmental folks from Advanced Environmental Group, discussing fuel issues, and I think Clint Eisenhower from Maersk was there as well on the carrier side. You could probably sniff around and get I think the Advanced Environmental Group has slides. You could probably contact them and get their slides.
This was, and what he's referring to is that there's an emission requirement that the EPA put out that they ships have to burn low sulfur fuels if they're coming into the United States now. And it matters because low sulfur fuel is more expensive, and especially in today's difficult economic environment for ship owners and operators, they're really worried about the bottom line and making every trip profitable. The EPA, I thought, did a great job in the rulemaking and getting the word out, and they had some very simple flyers on here. This is what it means, and this is going to be the process. But in my experience, the frustrating part of it is they created a waiver where you can self-report and say, I can't find low sulfur fuel. You have to describe the attempts you've made to try to purchase low sulfur fuel, and then conceivably you can burn your regular fuel. But while there's a great website and you can fill out the form, the EPA will never tell you, oh, that's okay, you have a waiver. And so you're still a little nervous about the whole thing. And there's liability with it. There's a fine that they could put on you. And if you're a repeat offender, the fine goes up and up and up. And what we found, we got an initial rash of calls when the rule took effect. The only thing that's kind of carried forward where we'll get calls is there will be a vessel owner who's chartered or leased the boat out to another operator, and the operator says, hey, it's no big deal, we filled out the waiver form, but the owner's the one that could be fined by the EPA if they decide that they haven't granted the waiver. Have you found that problem yet?
I haven't.
Okay.
That's good.
And that's an issue. Well, that's an issue that's out there, because then the owner has to go back to their contract and decide what they're going to do with the operator.
And the reason I mentioned Laurie is because we had a ECA webinar 2 years ago now, where we had folks from the EPA
Yep, Coast Guard.
and the Coast Guard laying out the foundation of what to look for, and
How they were
they
going to
took
enforce
questions.
it. And that's why I'd like to hear from Brandy as far as.
I don't know anything about
Oh,
it.
okay, because Coast Guard has a big, role in enforcing this. There's a memorandum of agreement between EPA and the Coast Guard with respect to enforcement.
I'm sure I'm getting ready to learn a lot about it in my new job, but I haven't had to deal with it in my present assignment.
Part 2.
Yeah.
Program next year.
Ray, if I haven't heard anything about it, Alaska actually filed a lawsuit saying it was, I think, unconstitutional. And I don't know whatever happened to that. So, I think the problem is that it seemed like a good idea. And I think everybody's learning now, how are we going to implement this? Because there are real world issues with trying to implement this whole scheme. And one of them obviously is the inability to get the low sulfur fuel at a decent.
And I think another problem is, I imagine that this is like a lot of government programs where somebody decided that they were going to do this program, but nobody was going to give more money to the EPA or the Coast Guard for enforcement. And so that may be one of the things that drives it in the future.
Well, and especially now, with budgets being cut. So.
All right, it's 1 o'clock, so I want to end the panel now to let everyone get back to their various assignments. But thank you all very much for attending. Thank you very much to our panel for coming and sharing your time with us. And I'd also like to thank Ted Dunlap again from RTI Group for the sailing mission we're about to embark on. RTI is a forensic engineering consulting firm headquartered in Annapolis, Maryland. So thank you, Ted. And everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you.